Welcome to this interview, or as many of you probably aware now, these are often more conversations than interviews, with the brilliant Brent Adamson and Karl Schmitt, who've written a fantastic new book, which is called The Framemaking Sale, which I highly recommend going out and grabbing a copy. You may recognise Brent's name because he's given us other sales literature that has become very important in our profession, which is obviously the challenger sale and the challenger customer. This was a really interesting conversation, and actually a fantastic book for that reason, is that it explores some really unique themes when it comes to both buying and selling. This is all about buyer confidence and the role that salespeople, sales organizations, and organizations more broadly play in making customers feel confident in the decisions that they're making and decreasing the chance of regret in those decisions as well. It forces us to think about the role that we play, how we sell, and how we approach our customers. We'll jump straight into it. We really hope you enjoy it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. So tell us a little bit about this. When you say the frame-making sale, what do we mean?
So the frame-making sale, it kind of started, so the frame-making is sort of the solution to a problem. So let's start with the problem, or at least maybe the opportunity is a better way to put it. So the book kind of takes as its starting point a bunch of work that Karl and I and others that you know were involved in producing at late-stage CEB, early-stage Gartner, trying to understand not so much B2B selling or B2B marketing, but really B2B buying, and understanding how B2B buying behavior is changing and sort of how it works, and what needs to happen in such a way that increases the likelihood of customers buying what we call a high quality, low regret purchase. So a high quality purchase, kind of what it sounds like, right? It's a purchase where the customer doesn't settle for status quo or good enough, but buys the bigger solution with the broader scope, the higher price point, hopefully the bigger margin. And usually when you buy something big and large and complex like that, it comes with a certain amount of buyer's remorse. And so what we're really looking for is the unicorn, where you buy the bigger solution, the higher quality solution, but you have less regret. So high quality, low regret. Mm-hmm. In studying that question, the question being, what needs to happen inside of a sale or a purchase in order to increase the likelihood of that outcome, we've run, and Karl can confirm, we've run just about everything we could possibly think of through that particular model. So we took Challenger, for example, broke it into lots of component elements. We took all sorts of different attributes of marketing behavior and content. We looked at buying group configurations, you name it. And what's interesting is there was this one attribute, this one result that showed up more than anything else in driving up the likelihood of a high quality, low regret purchase. And it wasn't just like, everything else is here and this other thing was here. It was like off the charts higher, significantly, dramatically higher. And that was simply the degree to which customers report a high level of confidence in the decision that they're making on behalf of their company. In other words, customers have to feel confident in these big scale, large scale decisions, or just purchase decisions, such in order to make a decision at all. And if they don't feel confident in choosing, they're just going to choose not to choose. In some ways, it feels self-evident, but when you look at the data and you see just the massive size of this opportunity, what you have here is what you recognize is it's like a wormhole to growth, right? It's like the shortest possible path to driving the kinds of commercial outcomes we're all seeking to drive, whether it's acquisition, expansion, or retention. And then it begins. So you see, so at the sort of first of all, what I took from that back when I was sitting there keynoting on this and traveling around the world talking about these ideas, is that, Aaron, we need to run everything through the lens of customer confidence and go-to-market, whether it's sales, marketing, success, you name it. What are we doing to interact with our customers in such a way that we make them more confident, such that they make more decisions and bigger decisions, hopefully in our behalf? This is where, and I'll wrap this up. This is like, I promised the preamble, and everything else will be shorter. But it's a really important thing to understand, because this is where this thing takes a left turn, and why we wrote the book in the first place is because often when we say what I just said, what you find is there's this sort of no duh reaction. It's like, well, yeah, of course. If customers aren't confident, they're going to choose not to choose. That makes sense. We can make them more confident. In fact, what will happen is I find particularly CEOs, but C-suite officers, they'll look at this and say, of course, it seems so self-evident. And then they'll say this. They'll say, this confirms exactly what I've been saying for years, which is, by the way, that's what keeps me up at night. But they'll say something like, This is why we need to make sure that customers are confident in everything that we do. We need to make sure they're confident in our product, confident in our people, confident in our service, confident in our delivery, confident in our value. And we got to make sure they're confident in our value. And what you find when you actually take this data apart and unpack it is it's actually the single biggest driver of growth for a high quality, low regret purchase. It has nothing to do with any of those things at all. That in fact what it is yes, it is about confidence and customers' confidence, but it has nothing to do with suppliers. In fact, it has everything to do with things like, from a customer's perspective, how confident are we, not in your value, but how confident are we that we even ask the right questions in the first place? I don't need to be confident in you as a trusted advisor. I need to be confident in me that I've done enough research. I don't need to be confident in your product and your brand and its features. I need to be confident whether or not I've even looked at the right alternatives to solve this problem in the first place, or even if I'm confident that I'm solving for the best problem that I should be solving for to begin with, right? And so the bottom line is what you find is you unpack these different dimensions of confidence. What you find is not only are they not supplier centric, they're actually supplier agnostic. They're not about customers' confidence in you. They're about customers' confidence in themselves. And this is something that, in Gartner, we kind of moved on and talked about other things, and there's other projects and other analysts, and, AI exploded and all that. But I've always been wondering for years now, there was several years now, what does that even mean? What does it mean to go to market, to engage customers, to sell to market in such a way that we're specifically and very purposefully engaging those customers in a way that's designed to solve not for their supplier perception, but to solve for their self-perception, to help customers not feel more confident in us, but to feel more confident in themselves. And that's when I called Karl and said, I come on this journey with me, because I think this is something really important that the world needs to hear.
Yeah, and what I find interesting, it takes platitudes like customer centricity, and it actually kind of pulls that apart and says you're thinking about this wrong. Like there's almost sort of like a mirror in a mirror, like recursion going on, where it's like learn about the customer. No. Learn about how the customer feels. No, learn about how the customer feels about themselves. Forget about you. Remove yourself from this. You have absolutely zero to do with this, right? And this kind of leads me neatly onto my next question, which is I've always thought that, and people often laugh at me when I say this in training sessions, that someone buying a complex deal is more akin to them getting married than it is to them purchasing a product, right? What do I mean by that? Well, we've gone through this process of reducing everything down to like rational numbers on spreadsheets and whatnot. And it's like, yeah, that's helpful often later. But really, this is like an emotive thing. This is deeply around emotion. Like, how do I feel if I make this mistake? How do I feel about this? How do I feel about that? And it's all feelings, right? And obviously, the brilliant Gerald Zaltman said that 95% of purchasing is emotive. It's not rational. That 5% is often retroactive, where you're justifying that decision.
Yeah.
What I really love about this book is that not just in a kind of esoteric way, it's very practical about saying, well, how do we get to the emotion quite quickly? How do we get to the point where we're getting them to explore how they feel about these things, as opposed to how they think about these things? Because they're two very, very different things. Talk to us a bit about this, because this thread throughout the book is really, really important. And it points to a modern phenomenon of us forgetting that we're selling to people, not to build grey that have like, parquet flooring and like, service toilets. We're selling to people, right?
Yeah, and probably you're exactly right, Aaron. And if you think about it, if you look at it through more of a neuroscience lens, right? You really, and this goes back to prior to us doing that study where we first discovered that decision confidence was the single biggest lever, the single biggest impact on a customer buying these big deals we're all looking for. It goes back to us having done some research and actually in partnership with Google way back in the day around this aspect of the psychological connection that we as B2B buyers make with the brand, with the purchase we're making. Because to your point, in some ways, it can have it, like you compared it to getting married. There's so much at stake for that individual, both personally and professionally, because if they make one of these big career altering decisions that goes well, that can position them for tremendous success for the future of their career with that organization. But if it goes badly, and this is where the fear comes in, and this risk of, oh, if this goes wrong, then I might be out of a job. Literally, I might need to be looking for work. And that's where when you look at that level of emotional connection for these B2B purchases versus the B2C, and we studied the most iconic B2C brands. If you are a customer that's making a decision to make one of these B2B purchases, your emotional connection level to these B2B brands far higher than anything we ever saw for an Apple or any of the iconic brands on the B2C side. And so you're absolutely right. This emotional piece is absolutely critical. And that's where, as you look at the way this needs to happen, and the dominoes we need to set up to help a customer actually make a purchase. First, there's things they need to know. Right? There's the information they need to have in order to be the basis of a decision. Then there's this emotional aspect of what they need to feel. And fortunately, amongst the vast range of human psychology and emotions, luckily there's kind of one that the data really highlights. It's this decision confidence is this lens we need to run everything through. So we know what it is we need to help them feel in order for them to take the active step of actually making the purchase and going through. So the neuroscience is very clear on this no, feel, do dynamic. And fortunately, the piece that so much of us have missed in the past is this emotional aspect in the middle. But luckily, there aren't 1,000 different emotions that we need to be triggering, which might be true on the B2C side. In the B2B world, it really boils down to one. And it's this aspect of how do we help our customers feel confidence in their own decision making.
Yeah, and I like the fact in the book that you've gone to kind of painstaking lengths to make that practical with things like the customer decision, confidence decision checklist and things like that, which are really, really valuable. And again, like I think I read a lot of sales books, and sometimes there's a danger of kind of navel gazing with this stuff, which is, oh, we've done this great research. It's like, well, good for you. What have we got out of this? But I really like the fact that in the book that you could actually organize yourself as a seller with some of this stuff to start making impact almost immediately. And I guess one of the questions I have, and forgive me for bringing this back to Brent, but you did this last time with Challenger Sale, where you kind of put a stake in the ground and said, well, actually, the way that sellers changed and the profile of a seller is different now. The demand of the buyer is very, very different, what they expect for us because of market conditions, because of the way what's happening with the market and the way that more generally more people are making decisions, and the various different things that everyone always talks about with how modern buying is becoming more complex. But I guess my question is that this stake in the ground around the role changing of a seller now, right? And it feels like that's the case from what you're saying in the book. Given insights to the audience, what are the changes now? What does that kind of new seller look like in this world where customer confidence is not only something we need to be addressing, but actually is one of the biggest predictive indicators of someone purchasing something and being happy with their decision that they've purchased as well?
To me, Aaron, it's really interesting. When we wrote the Challenger Sale, there was a number of people who were frustrated simply because they'd say for some reason it kind of got in their craw. Is that a word? I think that it's like there's nothing new here. We heard a lot. Oh, there's nothing new here, guys. You haven't. And what they would say is, my best salespeople are doing this already.
Yeah.
To which we'd always respond, no, we know your best salespeople are doing this already because it wouldn't have shown up in the data if they weren't doing it already. That's literally how it works, right? But I think it would be equally true, in fact, arguably even more true, to say that about framemaking and the framemaking sale, which is your best people are doing this already, because what we're really talking about, what we're trying to tap into, is this deep vein of just humanity, of just how human beings interact with each other. And so much of what we're talking about in the context of B2B purchases and B2B selling is, you can, Karl knows I like to joke, and there's painful history there that no one cares about sort of, I bring everything back to high school dating, right? Because it's actually kind of true. It's like what the things that work in sales are the same things that work in trying to find a mate, right? It's like, if you show up at a date and say, enough about me, now you talk about me, you're not going to get very far in that relationship. But what's funny is that's exactly how we train salespeople to do sales, right? It's like, enough about my value. Now here's some other people to talk about my value. Here's my raving fans to talk about my value. Here's my calculator to talk about my value. Now you tell me about how great. Let me ask you some questions to get an understanding of how you might see my value, right? It's like, it's crazy what we do, right? So the thing that we're asking sellers to tap into isn't some sort of completely new thing that they've got to add to their tools to their toolbox. So although we get into tactics, as you know, and deeply into tactics, and hopefully in a helpful way, it's to tap into the thing that's been there all along, which is their humanity, right? It is the normally, as Karl will know, I put this at the end. It's literally at the end of the book. The whole Challenger thing: don't lead with, lead to. So put the big idea at the very end, and so it's the very last chapter of the very last paragraph, the very last chapter of the book. I'll throw it out now because I know you enough, Aaron. I know you'll know what to do with this. But it's an analogy. I want you to take a moment. And I want you to think about someone in your life that's really important to you, or was really important to you, someone that you love very, very much. And and I think particularly for you, it's a poignant question given just what you've done this year in memory of your parents, and just the marathon that you run once a month. I don't know how you do. I have so much respect and admiration for what you're doing this year. But if you think about someone in your life that you truly love, someone when you think about them, it just kind of makes you smile on the insides. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a spouse, maybe somebody your past or your present. And if you think about that person, it just kind of makes you smile on the inside. What's really interesting to me about those relationships that we have, and hopefully if you're lucky, you have one or two of those relationships. If you think about that person, there's a chance they're pretty good. You're going to think to yourself, I love you not just because I love you, but I love you because I love me when I'm around you. And if you have one of those people in your life, That's an incredibly special thing, right? When you look in the mirror and think, I love this version of me that comes out as a result of being around that person. That is about as deeply human as one can get, right? And that's always been there. And what we're really asking in the frame making sale, it's just that we bury the lead and put it at the very end, because I don't know if we opened a sales book that way, if anyone would ever read it. But really what we're asking is, what would it take to be that kind of what would it take to engage your customer in such a way that you created that kind of relationship with your customer, that your customer, as a result of interacting with you, didn't just say, like, I like Aaron, he's a great guy, but they felt a little bit better about themselves,
Yeah.
a little bit more confident in the decisions that they're making, that the material benefit of you interacting with your customer accrued to them and their self-perception. And if you think, well, how the bleep am I supposed to do that? That's literally what the book is about. And that's what frame making is taking that idea step by step by step and unpacking it. At the high level, the book's all about the why that matters. At the tactical level, it's how do I do that? And this book, as you know, goes back and forth between these really big ideas and these really tactical sort of tools to make that happen. And I think not only is it, we lay out the urgent sort of why this matters. This is like, if you want to go to Cancun and get paid and have lucite trophies on your credenza, I don't know what a credenza is, but if you want them back there, that's what this is how you do it, because this is the shortest path to driving growth. But if you also just want to show up in a way that's a little less sales and a little bit more human, this is also the way to do that. And I think that, to me, is what hopefully people read the book and get inspired by the humanity of this book. And so it's like, I don't have to take my persona off and put on my sales persona to go sell effectively. It's literally just the opposite. We've been hiding in plain view what we knew all along, which is it's our humanity is our superpower when it comes to B2B sales. And this is why.
Yeah, it's such a brilliant point. But there is a kind of irony to that, though, right? Because throughout time, when it comes to selling, we've given our salespeople the tools in many ways to go and do the opposite of that, right? Which is, it's a tale as old as time, which is talk about ourselves, compare ourselves to the competitor, do this to your customer as opposed to be there with your customer, right? All of this stuff. So in many ways, what we're asking people to do is follow an instinct that's already there versus deploy a playbook that is being trained on you by your sales enablement function or your manager or the latest bit of insight you gathered off of LinkedIn. And I find that really interesting, is this thing of we almost need to strip away the garbage and the bullshit and actually be really present with the customer. Forget about us as a vendor. Let's just help them make the right decision. And by virtue of us doing that, we're going to add so much value that the decision actually becomes really easy. But more importantly, once they've made that decision, they'll feel good about that decision thereafter as well, because their satisfaction will be really high as well. Not a question there,
Aaron,
an observation. Go on, Karl, over to you.
Yeah, no, and that's spot on. And that's where, such the core of the book is this idea of the frame making mindset, right? And it's this different way to think about the role of sales that was shared with us. Again, in this time, I won't go into the depths of the story, although Brent really makes it live and breathe. But at the core of it is this idea that what our role in sales has to be is to help our customers make the best decision they can in as little time as possible. And again, both parts of that sentence are so critical that if you don't mind, I'll spend a minute to unpack each half. If we're helping that customer make that best decision, then, again, that's where so much of the work we did in the past, whether it be challenge or wherever the mechanism is, that helps us determine, is this customer really, should they prefer our solution to what they have now or the competitor or whatever it might be? Right. So it's, what is the basis for making that decision? And we spent years teaching about the impact of things like commercial insight from a challenger perspective. But that idea of how do we kind of establish that preference? So much that playbook you're referencing is all running at that, right? How do we make it so they like us best, so they prefer us, so they choose us, right? But what if the best decision isn't to choose us?
Yeah.
Often we put our sellers in positions that's like, hey, it doesn't matter what's good for the customer. What's good for us is to sell our solution. And we've all been down that path where through hook or crook, a customer is incented or ends up buying a solution that isn't a good fit. And we've all struggled with then serving them and renewing that, whatever the nature of that particular deal. Those are always terrible. It's truly the lose-lose for everyone involved, right? We might have gotten that bump in our quarterly number, but long term, it's a disaster, right? So first is that appreciation that how do we actually determine which are the best decisions for that customer to make, and when we are the right answer, right? And of course, the flip side of that is, well, what happens though if it's not us? And this is where that key aspect of the mindset is in as little time as possible, because if we're going to lose, we want to lose early, right? We want to fail fast. Because if this is a deal that truly isn't in the best interest for this customer, because maybe they're not ready yet. Maybe there's some other things they need to put in place first. Maybe there's some other things going on in their world that they need to get sorted before it makes sense for them to buy whatever it is we're offering. If we can be the honest person that helps them realize, you know what, we'd love to sell you this, but based on what we've talked about, you know what, I think these are a couple things that could create real risk or challenges for you. So let me leave you with that to sort through those things. And when you're ready, let's talk again, right? And imagine the trust that builds. Or imagine in terms of that aspect of relationship with that customer, because you're truly helping them make the best decision on their behalf. But you're doing it in a way that then saves time for yourself. So rather than chasing this not ideal deal for months or even years, if up front we can identify, no, this is not the best decision for this customer right now, and I need to redirect my energies elsewhere, it then truly becomes the best interest of everyone.
That mindset piece, which I think is chapter 7 from memory, is
Exactly.
really interesting, because you tell that brilliant anecdote about the CEO who stands up at the all hands and says, look, our objective is really simple, which is we want our customers to be confident in the decision they're making as quick as possible. And what I find really interesting about that is that there's pushback from the seller in that anecdote, which is the sellers, and this for me is the challenge. Not just with what you're preaching in the book, but with actually a lot of sales people in general, which is you're asking them now to adopt a mindset that feels counterintuitive to every single thing that selling or sales wisdom has spoken about in the past. And you would have experienced this with Challenger as well, which is I've got to now forget about my product or service. I become a middleman between the buyer and the decision that they make, even if that decision isn't me. For a salesperson, that feels like they're losing control. For a salesperson, that feels like they're almost walking them to the competitor, which was the pushback that gentleman got in that. So here's the challenge, and I guess me being a challenge to you is that for someone who spends their life trying to convince salespeople to do something differently, what's your rally cry to those sellers then who say that, well, hold on, this feels counterintuitive?
But I think it's a couple things, Aaron. First of all, is not to start with sellers. So something that Karl and I have been working really hard on, and there's an aspect of this in Challenger too, but I think it's arguably even more urgently important here with frame making, is to sit down with leadership and say and explain, essentially have a version, probably a shorter version of this conversation, and help them understand what it is that we're trying to do. So Brian Smith is the person you mentioned before, the CEO at a company called Expedient, where I was in the room in Florida when he stood in front of his team and said those words: our job is to help our customers make the best decision they can as little time as possible. Yeah. And at the time he was the chief sales officer, shortly thereafter promoted to CEO. And it's one thing when your boss's boss or your boss's boss's boss stands up and says it to you and says, this is our mission. But if, a seller stands up and says, well, here's what I think I'm going to do, and your manager stands up and says, no, you're going to hit your quarterly number or you're fired, that's a problem, right? So we have to get to a place where the organization, I don't know about the DNA, I don't know if it's rewiring an identity, but certainly the idea of the organization has to be, this is how we want to go to market. This is how we want to show up, because we believe this is the right way to sell, to not just to sell, but to drive growth. And this is why the story about love, all that stuff is at the end of the book, and the thing that's at the front of the book is a bar chart that shows this is the single biggest, best way to get paid. Full stop.
Yeah.
That's why we do this, right? I mean, it's like at the end of the day, we're still in sales, and our job is still to sell stuff. So this isn't like, this is not a book about how do we make the world a better place and make them happy? I mean, I think it's a neat side benefit that it has that aspect to it. But at the end of the day, we're still solving for the same thing we've been solving for 30 years, which is how do we drive more successful sales to completion? And one of the ways that you do that is by spending your time doing the things that will actually get customers to buy. And the other thing you do is to spend less time doing the things, spending your time on those places where it's not going to happen, right? Where the opportunity cost is high. And, Karl, kind of picking up on your point, it's, in that conversation, and maybe, you're not quite ready, call me in 6 months, or it might be, we may not be the best fit for you, But we work with two other companies that actually could really help you out with this. And so that's where things like partner selling and partner networks become really important. Keep them in the ecosystem and keep them involved such that you maintain access to that conversation. There's all sorts of ways that you can think about managing that sort of readiness conversation. But I think, Aaron, at the end of the day, you have to believe what we see in the data and what customers tell us again and again and again is if I don't feel confident making this choice, I'm just going to choose not to choose. And this is why 40 to 60% of deals end up in no decision and status quo. And so the thing that we all seem to be competing against, and it's completely natural and it's completely understandable, is we think our number one competitor is the competition. And somehow we have to get our customers to love us or like us or value us more than they like the competitor's offering. But if you start with the starting point of, our biggest competitor isn't so much the competition. Our biggest competitor is status quo. Our biggest competitor is just resignation, fear, exhaustion, overwhelmedness. And you think, well, if I want to sell more, I got to beat those things. This is the shortest path to beating those competitors rather than just getting your customer to like you more. Otherwise, what happens is you get these really frustrating outcomes like, well, Aaron, we love what you do. We just think your solution's amazing. We totally get the value you created, but we've decided to go in a different direction. Yeah. Kill me now. Or Aaron, I love what you do. And I'll tell you, man, if it were just up to me, I'd buy it today, but it's not just up to me. It's like, kill me now. So, it's like, Aaron, I see all the value that you're deriving for other companies. And I think that's amazing. And we'd love to see that kind of value at our company too. And we think you're a great partner to potentially do that. But, right now we're just not, I just don't think we're ready for that. Ugh, kill me now. It's like these are all, every one of those is symptomatic, not of customers doubting you, but customers doubting themselves. And it becomes a question of how can I become a coach, a guide, a Sherpa to guide them not to my product, but to guide them to confidence. And if I guide them to confidence, then I'm going to take my fair share of the pie. I'm just making the pie bigger. And that's how I win.
Yeah, and the other thing that the short-sightedness of it is that people forget about reciprocity as well. And I say this in my sessions, which is you would have recommended a plumber that you never used, but the experience they gave you in diagnosing your problem was so good, you're happy to recommend them. And this again is it takes a mental leap as a seller to turn around and go, well, guess what? I'm not thinking about my quarter. I'm thinking about how I actually build a reputation that precedes me, where people are recommending me by virtue of the value I'm giving them in their decision-making process, even when they don't pick me, right? So there's all these sort of secondary benefits that come from trying to do those things that you just said, which is being a coach, being a Sherpa, and guiding the customer and giving them confidence in the decisions that they're making. I'm interested to see on this because, Brent, it's a question I've asked you before, and Karl, maybe it's a question for you as well, is that I'm really fortunate where I get to interview a lot of people who've written books that have changed selling forever, particularly from a research point of view, as opposed to a kind of snake oil salesperson. Let me hand down my techniques that I've been using over the last 30 years. They don't really interest me. The thing that interests me actually is the moment in the research where it comes together. I'm keen to understand, what was that kind of eureka moment for you all? I think I know the answer from the book, but where you were looking at the research, you were siphoning through the data, you were kind of, you got that one thing and you thought, we've got something here. This is something that's unique. This is something that has a really interesting outcome if this is done right or wrong. What was that one piece of research, or was it all of it coming together at the same time?
I've got two, but Karl, I'd love to hear yours. What's your version of this?
The thing I would start with was, again, for any of our research studies, it always, begins with sort of the classic secondary lit review, right? And so Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Award-winning economist, unfortunately passed away in the last year, but his last book was something called Noise, which really gets into these questions of, how do we have confidence in decisions, and what is the nature of expert decision making, which is very much at the core of everything we're talking about with B2B. It's a really good book. Unfortunately, Kahneman is not a great writer for anyone who's ever tried to wade through any of his stuff. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend someone trying to wade through any of his, even Thinking Fast and Slow. They're kind of a slog. But at the core of it was this question as to what are the things that increase our decision confidence. And there were four that were listed as kind of the core of what's generally recognized in the academic literature from a neuroscience perspective. And two of them really don't have much of an opportunity to influence at all from a sales perspective. But there are two that we do. And one is going to sound very familiar and obvious to us all, which is just make it easier. If a decision is perceived to be easier, of course, we're going to have more confidence in our ability to make it correctly, right? And again, how many times have we all tried to add ease to our selling process, right? Every methodology, and often, if you really look closely, is it really helping it make it easier for the customer to buy, or is it really making it easier for the customer to buy from us? But even putting that aside, that's something that's been discussed, and we talk quite a bit about that in the book, of course. But the piece that no one really was talking about at all is this element of agency.
Yeah.
And how much of decision confidence is really based on the feeling that we have that we actually have sufficient control to actually be able to make this decision, right? Not just do we have the right information, but do we have the right authority? Do we have the right relationship to the other people in the buying group? The comment Brent made earlier about how many deals have we lost where the customer says, if it was just up to me, of course I'd buy it today. But that just highlights that lack of agency they're feeling. So one of the things we really wanted to emphasize in terms of this frame-making approach, where we're not making the decision for the customer, but we're framing the decision in ways that they feel that they have the confidence to make it for themselves, to construct that knowledge for themselves. That's so core to everything we talk about in framing. And frame making at its core is helping that customer frame complexity in a way that makes it feel more manageable. And this idea of agency is just absolutely at the core of everything we talk about in the book.
Yeah, that was really, I'll come to you in a second, Brett, but that was really interesting to me as well. Something that I've not thought about, which is we don't want to be in a position where you turn around and go, looks like it's us then, guys. You got to make that decision. It's like, that's a decision of one. Like that's not a decision at that stage. It reminds me of the old sweet shop conundrum, which is like, if you say to a child in a sweet shop, you call them sweets in America, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very good. Yep.
You can have any sweet you want. It's like the child leaves there with no sweet, or they leave there with one and they're like, I should have picked this one, right? Or the other one is, you can have one of these two sweets where they can make an informed decision. But the favorite is you can have any sweet you want except for this one. So, that's the one that I now want, right? But it points to this thing around like, we want the agency to say, well, I've actually made the decision versus someone has forced a decision on me. Or actually worse is, there's no decision to make here other than the decision or nothing, because nothing then becomes the easier option as well, as we see often as well. So that was really interesting for me in the book as well. So Brent, obviously, I think you had something you want to add about the research.
Yeah, no, it's a critical point, by the way. And for those who have never read it, Barry Schwartz's paradox of choice becomes a really important aspect of this, right? Which is, the paradox of choice is like, if I go to a restaurant and there's 100 items on the menu, I ironically, I'm never happy with whatever I choose because I'm always thinking about the thing I didn't choose. But if I go to, a restaurant with a menu of 5 items, suddenly it becomes, and each one is relatively differentiated from the other 4. I'm much more likely, research shows, to be satisfied with the decision that I made, and that's really what framing is all about. If Challenger is all about being frame breaking, this is about being frame making, which is taking this big thing that's big and hard and overwhelming, and just putting a framework around it that still allows for degrees of freedom inside the frame, such that customers are more likely to make a choice that they feel good about. And something we talk a lot about in the book is this idea of prompting and bounding. When I create that frame or co-create that frame with you, I can prompt you to think about things maybe you haven't thought of. It turns out it's these 3 things matter most, one of which you've never thought about before. So by these 3 things, not these 100, is bounding. Here's one you may have not have thought of as prompting. And again, this gets into tactical stuff. Here's though, because you geek out on this kind of stuff, Aaron, this is why I love you so much, right? So, you like, because you do your homework, you do the research, you find it interesting, right? So here's the backstory to confidence that might actually be interesting. Because for me, this was the moment. Because you might ask, how the heck did we even get on confidence in the first place? How did it start showing up in the data? And funny, Karl and I will remember different parts of the story in different ways because we experienced it in different ways. But here's how I remember it. So over the years at CB, we started doing after Jobs to be Done came out. So Jobs to be Done is an approach to customer and particularly consumer research that was written about by a guy named Bob Mesta, Moesta. Bob's still around and he's brilliant, and Clay Christensen. And they published this article called Jobs to be Done in HBR. As part of that, we began to wonder as a research team, could we take this idea of jobs to be done and apply it to a B2B setting? So we reached out to Bob and Karl did a little work with Bob. Our good friend Eric did a lot of work with Bob, and others on the research team were involved with Bob. And long story short, we applying his research and his methodology, we took and applying it to B2B, we found essentially there's 4 jobs to be, there's there was six, but there was four jobs. We'll call it four now. I'm going to simplify. So shut up, Brent. So I'll get to the point. So there are these four jobs to be done in a B2B purchase, which is problem identification, solution exploration, requirements building, and supplier selection. So four main jobs that customers have to complete. And the whole idea is customers go back and revisit those jobs on an ongoing basis. So they don't progress through a deal, but they loop through a deal. It's like I identify a problem and exploring solutions. I realize, I didn't get the problem quite right. I go back and revisit that. And so we knew from research that customers, this is all stuff we published back in the day, that customers on average, repeated each job. About 75 to 80% of customers we surveyed said they would go back and loop through a job at least more than once. Across a purchase. So that led to the original version of that spaghetti bowl diagram that so many know, and this plays a big factor, or plays a big role in an updated version of the book. But the thing that I asked one of our researchers, a guy named Howard, he's a really good dude. I said, okay, so first of all, we concluded from that is that buying isn't about progression, it's about completion. And by the way, now we're on the cutting room floor of the book, and this is like a half a chapter that never quite got in, but there's a really interesting question of like, as you don't really move through a purchase in a progressive sort of way, you move through a purchase in a completion sort of way. You got it. So when does a purchase happen? It happens when all four jobs are done or perceived to be done simultaneously. It's like, it's almost like a checklist of launching a missile or something. Like, problem identification, check. Solution exploration, check. Right. So that led to the question, Aaron. So how do I know when a job's done? What does done mean? Right? So problem identification, how do I know when I'm done with problem identification? And I asked the team that, and they said, well, we asked customers that. And what customers told us, like, well, I know I'm done when, well, you can't really know that you're done. You just kind of feel that you're done. It's like, well, what does that mean? It was like, I feel confident that I did enough research, that I looked at alternatives. And then you started unpacking all these little attributes like, oh, so wait a minute. So I have to feel confident that I asked the right question. I have to feel confident I did sufficient research and so on down the line. It's like, that's how I know when a job is done. Okay, great. So if I know that the job is done when I feel confident that I asked the right questions, okay, great. So which questions are the right questions? Are those the right questions? Or are these the right questions? And you see how you start spiraling on this? Like, well, what if you think those are the right questions? I think those are the right questions. How do I ever get done with a job? Well, as it turns out, those things aren't knowable. There's no objective finish line to any of this stuff, right? It's all subjective. It's all based not on what you know, but based on what you feel. And it's like, hold on, wait a minute. I mean, I know we've been saying this for decades, right? You buy with the heart and justify with the brain, or all those different sayings that we say. But now we're beginning to see actual and real research, these really interesting questions about this stuff isn't knowable. Like the physics of buying is based on completion, but completion in turn is based on feeling, not knowing. And that became like this, like, we need to go out and study this. And that's what led ultimately to this bar chart that sits at the front of this book. When we went out, so like, let's take these different attributes of confidence and feeling, put them in a research engine. And lo and behold, not only did they pop, but they just blew everything else out of the water, which is just, again, testament to Bob Meston, the freaking brilliant guy that he is, right? But and so then I went out and started. So that's part one. Part two is then I left Gartner. I joined the small company in sort of as a soft landing. And one of the agreements I had with that company was I could go out and do keynotes on the side. I could essentially side gig. So I started taking some of this cutting room floor stuff, some of these other findings, and putting together some of the new things I was hearing and learning, and started keynoting on it. And as I usually do when I start keynoting, that keynote gets tighter and tighter and better and better. And at some point, it started to resonate like crazy. At some point, I was doing a meeting in Miami Beach, and I walked out of there. It was a mid-sized company with PE backed, and the PE owners were in the back of the room, and everyone came up and said, "You just completely rewrote. Like, that's everything. You just rewrote everything about how we go to market, how we think about it. This is completely different. No one's talking like this." And that's when I realized, and it was the exact same thing I used to hear back in 2009 before Challenger. That's when I heard that in 2009 when I was doing the Challenger work. I walked into Matt Dixon's office one day and said, "I think we need to write a book." And this was the exact same, like literally viscerally, the gut feeling was the exact same. This needs to be something bigger and different, and this story is so compelling. And that's when I decided I need to be a book. And shortly thereafter is when I called Karl and said, "I need your help." So that's the, I don't know. I know you geek out on origin stories. Most people, your listeners probably
amazing.
don't, but that's kind of the origin story of where all this stuff came from.
But again, it just goes to show that the curiosity of that one question, when how
Yeah.
you know when a job's done, it was the key question, right? That
Yeah.
was the question that needed answering. And you touch on curiosity in the book as well. This concept of it's kind of the new skill that salespeople need. And so the old joke of the salesperson goes to a goes to a cocktail party and they meet someone and this salesperson says, "Well, what do you do for a living?" And the guy says, "Oh, I'm an astronaut." And he goes, "That's so interesting. Just out of interest, what software solution are you using at the moment?" It's like so this concept of you need this curiosity, and that's a great point. There is that those questions are the thing that actually the most important thing to ask. But this is really interesting for me, I guess. And again, I love talking about the past. Oh, and just on this note, I sent you an email on this. Is that what's been really fascinating for me, Brent? Is that I've spent a lot of time with you over the last maybe like 3 or 4 years or so in interviews and obviously going to see you and stuff. And I've heard you talking about these concepts and these ideas and
Yeah.
almost sort of in conversation and throwaway to see how they've just been developed in the book, I assume with Karl's brilliant input as well, is just so
100%.
fascinating. So anything that you've heard Brent speak about in the past and you thought, oh, that's actually quite interesting, or I'd never thought about that way there. The book goes into real detail around this and gives a lot of the answers to those comments and perspectives that Brent's been sharing over the last couple of years, including some of the stuff you did in your web series, which was great, by the way, as well.
Thank you.
The question for me is, right, and as much as I like talking about the past, I'm fascinated by how this starts having a ripple effect in the future because you touch on AI in the first chapter almost the kind of we can't ignore it. It's like it's there, right? Who knows what it's going to do. But with us kind of opening Pandora's box with this thing around customer confidence or confidence in their decisions, I should say, and obviously the staggering statistics that come out of the back of it, and it's so clear that this is critical that every single sales organization should be thinking about this from the top to the bottom. What impact does this have on the future for buying? How do you see this playing out? Karl, maybe if you want to kick us off.
Yeah, so this is what's fascinating with the evolution of AI taking such a dominant role in so many different parts. Yeah, again, we can't do a Google search anymore. We get a Gemini results, right? So ultimately, it's becoming embedded in everything we do, and whatever your AI of choice is, of course. But at this stage, again, if you think about it from sort of a neuroscience level, then so much of what we currently see as humans in terms of the answers we're getting back is we don't really trust what we're getting. And whether that's because of AI hallucinations or because of the fear, it's like, well, what is it that's behind the scenes in this engine that may cause some doubt or skepticism? So often what's happening today is if I put in a question like, and Brent's got a great story about looking to buy dog food. But again, if we think about how any of us approach a question we put into an AI engine today, actually right now it's not that we necessarily distrust the answer, but it's not sufficient to give us the confidence to actually go forward with something like a B2B purchase. And it comes back to that same point that I was talking about earlier with respect to agency.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if we're a seller telling a customer, oh, based on my 30 years of experience, this is what you should do. Similarly, if it's an algorithm or AI saying, oh, customer, here's what the engine tells you it's the same problem.
Yeah.
It might make it easier on the buyer, but it is doing nothing to support their agency. And without that aspect of agency, decision confidence simply isn't possible. And so that's where we do reference AI a bit because obviously it's a thing that's changing everything in our world. But the core reason why this is such a critical time for sellers is because sellers can take a posture, they can embrace this mindset and help the customer construct the knowledge for themselves in ways that at least today AI just still can't.
Yeah.
And maybe at some point it will. But for now, the way we as humans interact with it is if AI gives us some set of information, it actually stimulates more questions, more analysis, more cycles of analysis paralysis and decision and indecision, truly. And so it isn't the silver bullet that maybe some of us had hoped it might turn into, and is really, if anything, exacerbating the problem, not helping make it easier for customers to buy better.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that in my usage of it as well. Even if this is like, what camera shall I buy? It's like I actually leave AI with more questions and more answers. It's like, you're supposed to be helping me make the decision, but actually you're making the decision even harder. So that's spot on. I thought that might be the answer around that as well, to be perfectly frank with you. And my biggest fear around it is that customers are going to feel that it's the answer is by punching something into AI and not
Right. And
realizing
maybe even
the salesperson can bring. Sorry, go on.
that's absolutely right, because maybe even more so than the customer's boss or their boss's boss is like, well, wait a second, can't AI just give this to us,
Yeah,
right? And again, at some level, maybe it will help point in the right direction, but in terms of this core aspect of our psychology and how we're wired, again, through years and generations of evolution, this aspect of how we develop confidence in a decision isn't fundamentally going to shift overnight because AI said, we should turn right.
yeah,
Even if it does give an explicit answer that way, that isn't sufficient because it doesn't address this core question of agency. And that's where, for any of us as buyers, what we really look for in these situations is, what has someone like me done? Do I have a friend that bought a camera, or do I have a friend that had purchased dog food, or is there someone I can trust that's like me that made this decision, and how did it go for them?
yeah,
And so that's where we talk so much in the book, and you mentioned chapter 7 before, about this role of sellers to be that connector to help the customer connect with people like them that made a similar decision. And again, AI isn't able to do that, right? And it's that aspect of being that connector and helping you feel the human connection with others in ways that, again, advances our feeling of agency and control and decision confidence.
Here's a way to think about it, Aaron, that kind of sums it up. Is in sales, we all have a tendency, I think, and I'd raise my hand on this too, to think that our true value is our expertise. We're trained to think that our value is our expertise. We talk about seniority, and I've been doing this. So we often lead with, "I've been doing this for 30 years," right? So one of the things that we suggest in the book, which I think is just super interesting and compelling, is because if you think about it, like, well, if my true value is my expertise, how am I supposed to compete with AI? How am I supposed to compete with all this technology, with all this information? And I think the answer is it's a tough question, right? We could certainly get into, well, I'm more accurate than AI, and like maybe not. But what if we just rethink it all together? And what if we think actually your true differentiated value as a seller isn't so much your expertise, it's your access. It's your ability to share back to customers what other customers like them have been doing or have done or have learned, which is Carl's point about the connector, right? So
yeah,
so that you become a bridge to the thing that your customers want the most but have the least, which is just direct access to peer groups, to social proof, to other customers like them, to human connection. And I think what when you do that, when you show up in this way, that through this frame making approach, and with that as your mindset, what it allows you to do is two things simultaneously. One, differentiate yourself from all the other sellers out there who are still supplier centric, who are still focused on what to know, not what to feel, and are still focused on just the numbers and the value. And then you're also able to differentiate yourself from AI at the same time. So
yeah,
how do I differentiate myself from other sellers and technology at the same time? To me, this is like it's like threading the needle of finding your true value as a human-based seller. Is frame making allows you to do both of those things at the same time, and in ways that I don't think anything else, including challenge, would allow you to do today.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. And we do this thing with our customers actually, where every time a customer comes to us, we leave them with a questionnaire and say that here's 10 questions that you should be asking yourself at this stage. If you answer those questions and it comes back and it's like you're not right for us, we're really pleased for you. We've helped you make that decision that we're not right for you. And this concept of like the value you can bring is the clarity, is the confidence, is the untangling that spaghetti bowl that you spoke about before, is
Hmm.
like businesses would pay for that on its own, let alone for the
They do.
products that they get out of the back of it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, they pay consultants to come and do that for them in some cases.
100%.
Mm.
That's exactly right. It's funny because some of these things, like, it's like we need to be a trusted advisor. But I had a great conversation. I'll name drop because you geek out on this kind of stuff. I had a great conversation with Charlie Green the other day. Charlie Green is one of the authors of Trusted Advisor. And I said, hey, I'd not met him before. Dave Brock put me in touch with him. And I said, hey, Charlie, I'm about to go out into the world and talk a lot about this idea of trust. And I'd like to share with you what we were doing, what we're learning, just to see if it aligns with how you think about trust. Because I figured he'd either be totally for it or totally against it. And I wasn't sure which way it was going to break. And he was totally for it. He says, absolutely. Which is to say, the best way to win trust from your customer isn't to go in and say, trust me. It's actually to help them trust themselves and become the agent of their self-trust. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
In other words,
completely.
like in other words, your trust in me, Aaron, is a byproduct. It's not the goal. It's not the end. It's a byproduct
Yeah.
of me helping you trust yourself more, which is a totally different way of thinking about trust that we don't think about right now. And I think that to me is just part of this whole package of just thinking very differently about your opportunity and your role as a seller in the world that we're going into, where it's just well, I'll stop. And anyway, that I just this is just it's just so different. But I
No,
think the
but
opportunity is not only there; it's been there. It's always been there.
yeah, and again, like I don't want to kind of go over old ground, but this is the point you made
Yeah.
before about the loved one, which is like the most important thing is the way that you make them feel, but to your point, it's the way you make them feel about themselves. And like
Hmm.
that's like a deeply, deeply human thing. To the point, interestingly, where I remember watching an interview of a guy whose job it is to detect psychopaths. And he said, it's really interesting, you know, when you're with a psychopath, because when you're spending time with them, it's just amazing. Like they're charismatic and they're brilliant and they're like, you know, you're really engaged. But then you leave them and you feel bad about yourself and you're like, something's not right here. I've got a bad, like I feel a bit horrible for some reason. And it's actually how one of the ways that they detect psychopaths is how that person made you feel, right? And that in itself is really interesting. I could talk about this with you guys all day long, but I just want to end by saying thank you for the book. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. Um, I fully recommend that anyone go out and buy this if you're seriously interested in improving. There's some groundbreaking research in here that has truly changed the game, in my opinion. It's made me think about things in different ways. It's certainly going to change the way that I do things in my practice and also how I speak about this to the people that we train and coach as well. So, yeah, really well done, chaps. And where can everyone get the book?
Thanks, Aaron. So the book is available wherever books are. The audiobook, by the way, because people ask about it, is depending on when this airs, is either out soon or out now. So it's coming on. It's on its way. We're just a couple weeks away right at this moment from the audio version. You can find out more on the web at theframemakingsale.com, or if you like framemakingsale.com, they'll both go to the same place. Unlike Karl, I spend a lot of time living, hanging out, sleeping on LinkedIn and social selling. So you can find me there. Um, and those are probably the easiest places to find us. I've gone back, Aaron. You mentioned the weekly video series I did for a couple of years. I've reinitiated and started that back up. So we do a lot of video work and taking all these ideas and breaking them down into little snippets, and we post all those on our YouTube channel, The Framemaking Sale, and then also on LinkedIn and on our website as well. So there's lots of content out there. Reach out. We'd love to go on this journey with anyone. I, it seems so completely over the top to say this, and it's certainly our hope, but it's also my deep-seated belief because I wouldn't have done. I quit my job and put everything on the line to write this book and put it out in the world because I believe in it so much, Aaron. And I think this is the book, the way, the idea for the next 10 years. If you want to think about what does the next sort of 10-year tranche of B2B selling look like, I'd be hard pressed to come up with a better idea than to say this is the bet that I would place for the next 5 to 10 years on what world class selling is going to look like for the next decade.
I wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree.